same-day registration, very good turnout in Iowa as well, right below us, states that have put in place some really expansive voter laws. And it doesn't mean Democrats always get elected. We've had Republican governors in Minnesota. We have a Republican governor in Iowa. And I just point out that I think the more we can do to encourage people to vote, the better democracy we have. And I want to turn to another quick question on a democratic issue, as in a democracy issue that was raised by Senator Graham. And as Senator White House, I just returned with Senators McCain and Graham from a trip to Ukraine, Baltics, Georgia, and learned there about how these intrusive cyber attacks are not just unique to our country, not just unique to one party, not just unique to one election, and they've seen that movie before in those countries. And do you have any reason to doubt the accuracy of the conclusion reached by our 17 intelligence agencies that in fact Russia used cyber attacks to attempt to influence this last election? I'm not asking if you believe it influenced it, just if you believe the report of our intelligence agencies.
I have no reason to doubt that and have no evidence that would indicate otherwise.
Thank you. Violence Against Women Act, Senator Leahy asked some of those questions, really important to me. You and I discussed it. I just have one question there. If confirmed, will you continue to support the life-saving work being done by the Office on Violence Against Women?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Immigration, you and I have some different views on this, and I often focus on the economic benefits of immigration. The fact that we have 70 of our Fortune 500 companies headed by immigrants. At one point, 200 of our Fortune 500 companies were either formed by immigrants or kids of immigrants. Roughly 25% of all U.S. Nobel laureates were foreign born. And just to understand, in a state like mine where we have entry-level workers in dairies are immigrants, major doctors at the Mayo Clinic, police officers who are Somali, if you see that economic benefit of immigrants in our society?
Well, immigration has been a high priority for the United States. We've been a leading country in the world in accepting immigration. I don't think American people want to end immigration. I do think that if you bring in a larger flow of labor than we have jobs for, it does impact adversely the wage prospects and the job prospects of American citizens. I think as a nation, we should evaluate immigration on whether or not it serves and advances the national interest, not the corporate interest. It has to be the people's interest first. And I do think too often Congress has been complacent in supporting legislation that might make businesses happy, but it also may have had the impact of pulling wages down. Dr. Borjas at Harvard has written about that. I think he's the world's perhaps most effective and knowledgeable scholar, and he says that does happen. Wages can be diminished, and one of the big cultural problems we have today is middle class and lower class Americans have not, lower class economically, are not having the wage increases that we'd like to see them have. In fact, since 2000, wages are still down from what they were in 2000.
I just see that we can do a mix of making sure that we have jobs for people here and then understanding that we're a country of immigrants.
On that subject, you're familiar with Canada.
Okay.
We are people of America. You are not going against American legislation that will keep white families together. You are not you are supported by hate groups that are happy to try to push racist legislation. You are not a general.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just have another 30 seconds here. I had one last question.
Maybe 45 seconds, Mr. Chair. I would just say that you come up close to the Canadian system. I think may be some of those policies ought to be considered by the United States.
My last question, Mr. Chairman, is on the reporters issue. Free press, I believe, is essential to our democracy. And I've always fought to ensure that those rights aren't compromised. My dad was a reporter, a newspaper reporter for years, and I'm especially sensitive to the role of the press as a watchdog. You've raised concerns in the past about protecting journalists from revealing their sources. You did not support the Free Flow of Information Act. In 2015, the Attorney General revised Justice Department rules for when federal prosecutors can subpoena journalists or their records. And he also committed to releasing an annual report on any subpoenas issues or charges made against journalists, and committed not to put reporters in jail for doing their job. If confirmed, will you commit to following the standards already in place at the Justice Department? And will you make that commitment not to put reporters in jail for doing their jobs?
Senator Klobuchar, I'm not sure. I have not studied that those regulations. I would note that when I was United States Attorney, we knew, everybody knew, that you could not subpoena a witness or push them to be interviewed if they were a member of the media without approval at high levels of the Department of Justice. That was in the 1980s. And so I do believe the Department of Justice does have sensitivity to this issue. There have been a few examples of where the press and the Department of Justice haven't agreed on these issues, but for the most part, there is a broadly recognized and proper deference to the news media. But you could have a situation in which a media is really not the unbiased media we see today, and they could be a mechanism through which unlawful intelligence is obtained. There are other dangers that could happen with regard to the federal government that normally doesn't happen to the media covering murder cases in the states.
All right, well, thank you, and I'll follow up with that in a written question when you have a chance to look.
If you would, I would.
Thank you. Thank you.
I call for the first time on a new member of the committee, Senator Sass from Nebraska.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you for having me. Before I get started, I'd like to enter into the record a letter of support from 25 current state attorneys general, including Doug Peterson, the attorney general from my state of Nebraska. The letter reads in part, "No one is more qualified to fill this role than Senator Sessions." This is obviously important testimony from the top law enforcement officers of 25 states. I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to include this in the record.
Without objection, it will be included. Proceed, Senator Sass.
Thank you. Senator Sessions, when you were introducing your grandkids, and I'm amazed that they stayed around as long as they did, mine would have been more disruptive earlier. I was thinking about all the time I spend in schools, and we have a crisis in this country of civic ignorance. Our kids don't know basic civics, and we have a crisis of public trust in this country in that many Americans presume that people in the city are overwhelmingly motivated by partisan perspectives rather than the public good. Tragically, our current president multiple times over the last 3 or 4 years has exacerbated this political polarization by saying that he didn't have legal authority to do things and then subsequently doing exactly those things. Quite apart from people's policy perspectives on these matters, this is a crisis when kids don't understand the distinction between the legislative and the executive branches, and when American voters don't think that people who serve in these offices take their oaths seriously. So it's not always as simple as Schoolhouse Rock jingles on Saturday morning, but could you at least start by telling us what you think the place for executive orders and executive actions are?
That's a good question and a good premise that we should think about. People are taught Schoolhouse Rock is not a bad basic lesson in how the government's supposed to work. Legislators pass laws. Congress, the president executes laws, as does the entire administration, as passed by Congress or follows the Constitution. And the judicial branch decides disputes as a neutral umpire, an unbiased participant of any of the sides of the controversy, and does it objectively. So I think every day that we get away from that is really dangerous. And it is true that if a president says, I do not have this authority, and other people say the president does not have certain authority, and then it is done by the president, it confuses people. And it's, I think, colleagues, we too little appreciate something that's corrosive happening out in our country. There is a feeling that judges just vote when they get a big case before them on what their political agenda is, and not what the Constitution actually requires. That judges can redefine the meaning of words to advance an agenda that they have that may not be the agenda of the American people. And that inevitably is corrosive to respect for law.
Thank you. But take it one step further, because there are going to be many cases, there'll be many instances where the administration in which you're likely going to end up serving will want to do things, and they'll want to know what the limits of their executive discretion is. Pieces of legislation that have been passed around here in recent years sometimes are, well over 1,000 pages with all sorts of clauses. The secretary shall ... fill in the law. So this Congress has regularly underreached and invited executive overreach. This Congress has regularly failed to finish writing laws and then invited the executive branch to do it. What are some of the markers that you would use to help understand the limits where the executive branch cannot go?
We really need to reestablish that. Professor Turley, Jonathan Turley, has written about this. It's just powerful. He's certainly an objective voice in American jurisprudence, and he says that Congress has just fallen down on its job. Now, of course, there are two ways. One of them is that it writes laws that are too broad. And I would urge all of you to be sure that when we pass a law, or you pass a law, if I'm confirmed, that law is clear and sets limits. When it doesn't set limits, then you can have the secretary of this agency or that agency claiming they have certain authorities, and you end up with a very muddled litigation maybe resulting from it. So reestablishing the proper separation of powers and fidelity to law and to limits is an important issue, and I think that's what you're suggesting.
Could you tell me under what circumstances, if any, you think the Department of Justice can fail to enforce a law?
Well, it can fail to enforce it by setting prosecutorial policies with regard to declining to prosecute whole chunks of cases and, in fact, eliminate a statute. If a new tax is passed and the Department of Justice says it can't be collected, then the law is not followed. You also have circumstances in which can redefine the statute or alter, if we're talking about improper actions, it could expand the meaning of the words of the statute far beyond what Congress ever intended. And that's an abuse too.
Not to interrupt you too soon, but the improper, but also what is proper, because this administration has made the case regularly that they need to exercise prosecutorial discretion because of limited resources. And obviously there aren't infinite resources in the world. So what are some proper instances in your view when an administration might not enforce a law?
Well, critics of the immigration enforcement, the DAPA and the DACA laws, said that the prosecutorial discretion argument went too far. It basically just eliminated the laws from the books. Secondly, with regard to that, the president's the order came from Homeland Security, not from the Department of Justice, but Homeland Security's order not only said we're not going to force the law with regard to certain large classifications of people, but those people who'd not been given legal status under the laws of the United States were given photo IDs, work authorization, and social security numbers, and the right to participate in these government programs that would appear to be contrary to existing law. So that would, to me, suggest an overreach.
And in parallel, before the courts, what instances would it be legitimate, if any, for the Solicitor General to not defend a law in court?
That's a very good question. And then sometimes it becomes a real matter. In general, the Solicitor General, as part of the Department of Justice and the executive branch, states the position of the Department of Justice. And it has a duty, the Department of Justice does, to defend the laws passed by this body, by Congress. And they should be defended vigorously, whether or not the Solicitor General agrees with them or not, unless it can't be reasonably defended. And so sometimes you reach a disagreement about whether it's reasonably defensible or not. But that's the fundamental question. And the Department of Justice should defend laws that Congress passed unless it's they're unable to do so in a reasonable way.
What is the place of independent agencies in a unified executive branch? And do you envision that you will be making any recommendations to the president to rein in independent agencies in an effort to preserve the constitutional distinction between the powers of the Congress and the administrative responsibilities of an executive branch?
Senator, it's a good question, and kind of a historic question at this point in time, because it does appear to me that agencies oftentimes see themselves as independent fiefdoms. And sometimes you even hear the president complain about things clearly under his control. I remember President Clinton complaining about the death penalty processes of the Department of Federal Government when he appointed the Attorney General, who had just appointed a committee to make sure the death penalty was properly carried out. So I mean, like, whose responsibility is this? You're in charge. You can remove the Attorney General if you're not happy. So those kind of things do continue out there that we need to be careful about. And I thank you for raising it.
I have less than a minute left. So last question, but going back to something that Senator Lee was asking about, could you just give a top line summary of what you view the responsibilities of the OLC to be and what the relationship would be between the OLC, the Office of the Attorney General, and the White House?
Well, OLC has statutory duties to make opinions. This OLC team reports to the Attorney General, who could reverse, I suppose, or remove the OLC head, the Deputy Attorney General, if he thought that department was not following the law. But essentially, they are given the power. As Attorney General, I had an opinions section in Alabama, and they rendered opinions on a whole host of matters when called upon from school boards and highway departments and that sort of thing. So this OLC does represent a key position in the Department of Justice. They must have extraordinary legal skill. They have to be terrific lawyers. They have to understand the constitutional order of which we are a part, and they should render objective decisions day, week after week. It was ultimately the responsibility of the President and the Attorney General to ensure that we have that kind of quality at OLC.
Senator Franklin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
In 2009, when you became the ranking Republican on this committee, you were interviewed. You would approach the committee's work and nominations specifically. You said that Democrats should expect you to be fair because you had been through this process yourself back in 1986, and you felt that back then the committee had distorted your record. You said that moving forward, quote, "We're not going to misrepresent any nominee's record, and we're not going to lie about it," unquote. And we certainly don't want to do that, colleague. But I also think it's fair to expect that sitting before us today, that you're not going to misrepresent your own record. That's fair to say, right?
That is fair.
Good. Now, in that same interview, you said, quote, "I filed 20 or 30 civil rights cases to desegregate schools and political organizations and county commissions when I was the United States Attorney." So 20 or 30 desegregation cases. Did I misread that quote?
I believe that's what I've been quoted as saying. And I suspect I said that.
Okay, now that was 2009, but in November this year, your office said, quote, "When Senator Sessions was U.S. Attorney, he filed a number of desegregation lawsuits in Alabama, not 20 or 30 this time, but a number." So tell me, did you file 20 or 30 desegregation cases, or is it some other number?
Well, thank you, Senator Frank, and it is important for us to be accurate. The records don't show that there were 20 or 30 actually filed cases. Some of the cases involve multiple defendants and multiple parties, like a school board and a county commission being sued for racial discrimination or things of that nature. But the number would be less than that, as we've looked at. So
what do you think would have caused you to say
I don't know.
that you filed 20 or 30 desegregation?
Well, we had cases going throughout my district, and some of them were started before I came and continued after I left. Some of them were brought and then settled promptly. And so it was extraordinarily difficult, actually. I was surprised to get a record by checking the docket sheets to find out exactly how many cases were involved. I heard one lawyer from the Department of Justice agreed with
Let
that
me move on.
large number,
Fine.
but the record doesn't justify it.
The questionnaire you submitted for today asks you to list and describe the quote 10 most significant litigated matters you personally handled. And among the cases that you listed that you personally handled are 3 voting rights cases and a desegregation case. Last week, I should note, 3 attorneys who worked at DOJ and who actually brought 3 of the 4 cases wrote an op-ed piece in which they say, quote, "We can state categorically that Sessions had no substantive involvement in any of them." Now, you originally said that you personally handled 3 of these cases, but these lawyers say that you had no substantive involvement. Chairman Grassley, I would ask that op-ed from last Tuesday's Washington Post be entered into the record.
Without objection, it will be entered.
Are they distorting your record here?
Yes. In fact, one of the writers there, Mr. Hebert, spent a good bit of time in my office. He said I supported him in all the cases he brought, that I was more supportive than almost any other U.S. attorney, and that I provided office space. I signed the complaints that he brought. And as you know, Senator Franken, when a lawyer signs a complaint, he's required to affirm that he believes in that complaint and supports that complaint and supports that legal action, which I did. We sued.
So that's your personal involvement. Was that your name was on it?
Well, look, you can dispute the impact or the import of the questionnaire. Another attorney, Paul Hancock, who brought cases in our district, said, well, the Attorney General claims credit for the cases in the Department of Justice. He saw nothing wrong with my claiming that this was a case that I had handled.
Okay, 2 of the...
So you can disagree with that, but those
I want to get through this, and I don't want you... I want to get through
on
this.
The docket sheet, my name is listed number 1 on the, as the attorney for the case.
I'm not a lawyer. I'm one of the few members of this committee who didn't go to law school, and usually I get by just fine, but it seems to me that a lawyer, if a lawyer has just his name added to a document here or filing there, that lawyer would be misrepresenting his record if he said he was personally handled these cases. 2 of the lawyers who wrote the op-ed have also submitted testimony for today's hearing. Mr. Jerry Hebert and Mr. Joe Rich. Mr. Hebert says, quote, it says he, quote, litigated personally 2 of the 4 cases you listed. He said, I can state with absolute certainty that Mr. Sessions did not participate personally in either. Mr. Rich worked on 1 of the 4 cases you listed. He said, quote, I never met him at that time or any other time, and he had no input to the case. These represent 3 of the 4 cases that you claimed that were among the top 10 cases that you personally handled. Now, in your 1986 questionnaire, You use phrases like, quote, I prepared and tried the case as sole counsel, and quote, I was the lead prosecutor on this case, assisted by so-and-so. Why didn't you use the same level of detail in your 2016 questionnaire?
And looking at this questionnaire, we decided that was an appropriate response since it was a major historic cases in my office. Let me just reply, Senator Franken, in this fashion. Mr. Hebert, when in 1986, when he testified at my hearing, said, quote, we have had difficulty with several U.S. attorneys in cases we have wanted to bring. We have not experienced that difficulty in the cases I have handled with Mr. Sessions. In fact, quite the contrary, close quote. He goes on to say, I've had occasion numerous times to ask for his assistance and guidance. I have been able to go to him, and he has had an open door policy. And I've taken advantage of that and found him cooperative. And that is an accurate statement. I don't know Mr. Rich. Perhaps he handled a case that I never worked with. He goes on to say,
well, one of the cases.
No, I want to raise this question.
One of the cases that you listed was a case that Mr. Rich handled. So if you don't know him, it's hard for me to believe that you personally handled it.
Well, when I found that these cases, I had been supportive of. Sure, I was. Mr. Hebert says, quote, and yet I have needed Mr. Sessions' help in those cases, and he has provided that help every step of the way. In fact, I would say that my experience with Mr. Sessions has led me to believe that I have received more cooperation from him, more active involvement from him, because I have called upon him, close quote. Quote, I have worked side by side with him on some cases in the sense that I have had to go to him for some advice, close quote.
In some cases, we're not necessarily the ones you listed.
Well, look, okay, it was 30 years ago, and my memory was of this nature, and my memory was my support for those cases.
Your memory, okay. Look, I'm one of the few members of this committee who's not a lawyer. The chairman, the ranking aren't. But when I hear I filed a case, you know, I don't know some of the parlance, but it might have a special meaning in legal parlance. But to me, as a layman, it sounds to me like filed means I led the case or I supervised the case. It doesn't mean that my name was on it. And it seems to me, look, I'll close, Mr. Chairman, setting aside any political or ideological differences that you or I may have, DOJ is facing real challenges, whether it's protecting civil rights or defending national security. And our country needs an attorney general who doesn't misrepresent or inflate their level of involvement on any given issue. So I consider this serious stuff, as I know that you would if you were in my position.
Well, you are correct, Senator Franken. We need to be accurate. When this issue was raised, I did do a supplemental that said I provided assistance and guidance to Civil Rights Division attorneys, had an open door policy with them, and cooperated with them on these cases, close quote. I signed them, I supported cases, and attempted to be as effective as I could be in helping them be successful in these historic cases. I did feel that they were the kind of cases that were national in scope and deserved to be listed on the form. If I'm in error, I apologize to you. I don't think I was.
Well, you didn't. You couldn't find 20 or 30 desegregation cases that you stated you had participated in, and you don't sound like you personally handled cases that you said you personally.
Well, I was on a radio interview without any records, and that was my memory at the time.
I think you answered the question. Senator Flake, now it's 12:59, so at 2:09, we will adjourn for lunch. I'll be back here then at 2:39, and whoever's president will start then, but I hope everybody can be back here at least by 2:45. Or, well, whatever, I got the, you know what I mean. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. Wait, you say we're adjourned or I'm going?
Oh, you go ahead.
Okay, all right. Great. It's always nice being the last one standing between lunch.
Let's have order for Senator Flake.
Hey, I just want to say at the outset how much I've enjoyed working with you and being your colleague. I appreciate having you as a friend. It's no secret we've had a different opinion on immigration legislation that we put forward. You've had different ideas, but I had no doubt that as Attorney General, you'll faithfully execute the office. And I appreciate the answers that you've given today. Let me ask unanimous consent to submit a column written by our own Attorney General in Arizona, Mark Bertovich, for the Hill newspaper this week, supporting
without objection, it'll be included.
He's supporting your nomination. Let me talk to you about an aspect of immigration that's important in Arizona. As you know, we have a large border with Mexico. We have a program called Operation Streamline that has over the years been tremendously effective in cutting down recidivism in terms of border crossers. What it is, basically, it's intended to reduce border crossing by expeditiously prosecuting those who enter the country illegally under a no tolerance or zero tolerance policy. It's credited with being instrumental in achieving better border security, specifically in the Yuma sector along the western side of Arizona's border with Mexico. Nevertheless, in recent years, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Arizona adopted a policy that ended prosecutions for those who cross without criminal history other than simply crossing the border. I've asked Attorney General Holder and Attorney General Lynch, as well as Secretary Johnson at Homeland Security, on what is being done here, and I haven't gotten a straight answer, no matter how many times I ask the question. So I'm looking forward to a little more candor here. As Attorney General, if you're confirmed, what steps will you take to restore Operation Streamline to a zero tolerance approach that's been so successful in Arizona, in a portion of Arizona's border?
Thank you, Senator Flake. I have enjoyed working with you, and I know that you bring your views on the immigration system. Like you, I believe that Streamline was very effective, and I was really surprised that it's been undermined and significantly. The reports I got initially some years ago, maybe a decade or more ago, was it was dramatically effective. And so I would absolutely review that. And my inclination would be, but at least at this stage, to think it should be restored and even refined and made sure it's lawful and effective. But I think it has great positive potential to improve legality at the border.
Well, thank you. It's been effective in Yuma, and I can tell you there's concern there among the Sheriff's Office, Sheriffs Wilmot and others, concern that we're seeing an increase in border crossings simply because the cartels understand very well where there's a zero tolerance policy and where there is not. Word spreads. And we could quickly get to a situation where we have a problem in the Yuma sector like we do in the Tucson sector. Is there any reason why we haven't expanded this program to the Tucson sector if it's been successful elsewhere?
I do not know what reason that might be. It seems to me that we should examine the successes and see if they can't be replicated throughout the border.
All right. Well, thank you. I look forward to working with you on that.
I appreciate that opportunity to work with you on that because I've long felt it's the right direction for us to go.
Thank you. When we have a successful program, it's difficult to see it scrapped and to see the progress that's been made in certain parts of the border done away with. Let me get to another subject here. Victims' rights. This is an area of the law that you've shown particularly interest in over your time as a senator.
I have with me letters of support for your nomination from various victims groups and advocates, victims of crime and leniency, Verna Watt, and victims of and Friends United, op-ed by Professors Paul Cassell and Steve Twist, all in support of your nomination. I'd ask that these documents be placed as part of the record. As Attorney General, what steps will you take to ensure that victims' rights are protected?
We cannot forget victims' rights. We have a victim a witness legislation that creates within each United States Attorney's Office a victim witness coordinator, and the job of that person is to make sure that concerns of the victims are heard. If they have to come to court, to help them get there, to make sure that they don't feel threatened and are protected. That's a direct responsibility of the Department of Justice and the criminal justice system as directed by Congress. So I really think that's one step. And that's the fundamental mechanism. I think Senator Kyle was a strong advocate for that, and it helped really improve the treatment of victims in federal criminal cases. There's just no doubt about it.
Well, thank you. I was going to note the presence of former Senator Kyle, my predecessor in this office, who did so much work in this area, partnering with you. So thank you for that answer.
I'm honored that he's giving of his time to assist me in this effort. Honored very greatly.
Thank you. Let's talk about the Prison Rape Elimination Act. It was mentioned previously, I think, by Senator Collins. As Attorney General, you not only led the Department of Prosecutors and law enforcement officers, but also the Bureau. You will lead not only the Department of Prosecutors and law enforcement officials, but also the Bureau of Prisons. You'll be responsible for 190,000 federal inmates currently in custody. This is an often overlooked part of the Attorney General's role, but it's an important part of the position that you're being nominated for. I believe one of the highlights in your record in the Senate is your leadership in passing the Prison Rape Elimination Act of 2003, or PREA, which passed both chambers without objection and was signed into law by George W. Bush. This was a bipartisan bill. You worked across the aisle with the late Senator Kennedy, as well as with Republican Representative Frank Wolf, Democrat Representative Bobby Scott in the House. And I have letters of support from anti-prison rape activists that I'd also like to put as part of the record, without objection, if I could. Thank you. With the law approaching its 15th anniversary, 11 states have certified that they're in compliance with the national standards. Another 41 states and territories have provided assurances that they're working toward compliance. Only 4 states and territories have chosen not to participate. Is PREA meeting the expectations you had for it when you introduced the bill in 2003?
That it's improved the situation. As to whether it's reached its full potential, I don't think I'm able to tell you with certainty, but I certainly think it's made a positive difference. You know, it was a special time for me. Senator Kennedy was a strong critic of me in 1986. And he said, you know, as we were working on this, he said, I've wanted to work with you on legislation like this. And I think it was sort of a reconciliation moment. We also worked on another major piece of legislation for several years. It would have been rather historic, but it was private savings accounts for lower wage workers in America that I guess the financial crisis of 07 or somewhere, some things happened that ended that prospect. But I believe that it's important for American people to know that when an individual is sentenced to prison, they're not subjected to cruel and inhuman punishment under the Constitution at a minimum. And the idea that was so widely spread that there's routine sexual abuse and assaults in prisons and other kind of unacceptable activities was widespread in our media and widespread among the American people. One of our goals was to establish just how big it was to require reporting, to and create circumstances that help ensure that a person who should be prosecuted for violence in the prison actually do get prosecuted, was a real step forward. We do not need to subject prisoners to any more punishment than the law requires.
Thank you. And just remaining seconds I have, let me just say there's another area that we have worked on and hopefully we can continue to work on, and that's the area of duplicative DOJ grants. As you know, the department awarded approximately $17 billion in grants over the years. OIG reports, GAO reports have all shown that there's duplication and waste, sometimes fraud and abuse. We continue to commit to work to root out this kind of duplicative action there.
Well, I know you've had a history of being a staunch defender of the Treasury against those who would abuse it, and I believe the same way. It's the taxpayers' money. Every dollar that's extracted from an American citizen that goes into the government needs to get to productive, valuable activities. And any of it that's delivered for political and insufficient reasons is a cause of great concern. I will make it a priority of mine to make sure that the dollars that we have are actually getting to the purposes they're supposed to go for. It's one thing to say, I did a great thing, I got more money for this good purpose, but did it really efficiently and effectively go there? Did it really make a positive difference? So I think the Department of Justice can utilize those grant programs to help valuable activities, and it needs to guard against improper activities.
Thank you, Senator Sessions. Thank you.
We'll break for about 30 minutes. We'll reconvene at 1:40. Senator Coons will be next up, and he's indicated he'll be here on time. So recess for now.
The Senate Judiciary Committee now in recess, a 30-minute lunch. We just heard from the chairman, Chuck Grassley, make that announcement. Hello, I'm Wolf Blitzer.
It's 1 p.m. here in Washington, D.C., wherever you are watching from around the world. Thank you for joining us.
It's been a very, very intriguing, important several hours, Jake, that we've been listening to Jeff Sessions, the senator from Alabama, who has been nominated to become the Attorney General of the United States. I want to start off quickly and play this little clip. He announced that if there were any legal proceedings to go against the former Democratic presidential candidate, Hillary Clinton, he would recuse himself. Listen to this.
In light of those comments that you made, some have expressed concern about whether you can approach the Clinton matter impartially in both fact and appearance. How do you plan to address those concerns?
I do believe that could place my objectivity in question. I've given that thought. I believe the proper thing for me to do would be to recuse myself from any questions involving those kind of investigations that involve Secretary Clinton and that were raised during the campaign, or could be otherwise connected to it. Okay. This country does not punish its political enemies, but this country ensures that no one is above the law.
Very intriguing the way he said that, and it was a bold moment.
He said he would recuse himself, that he tried to make clear were that even if he opposed laws that had been passed, he would abide by them. Whatever his personal feelings, he thinks that same-sex marriage is the law of the land, as President-elect Trump has said, and talked about how he would protect the rights of LGBT Americans.
Roe v. Wade, he said, also is the law of the land, and he would enforce that law.
Well, it's the law of the land as of right now. We don't know what the next Supreme Court will do, but absolutely. Although he did say, when asked about the Dreamers and the executive action taken by President Obama, these are the children brought here when they're individuals who were brought here illegally, who were children when they were brought here, and they were given some sort of path to citizenship, legal status. He did say that he would not have an objection to abandoning that order by President Obama. He thought it was questionable constitutionality.
He said, but that was not a priority. The priority was to go after undocumented immigrants here who had committed serious crimes. That was going to be the focus of their immediate attention. He clearly was well prepared. He had gone through a lot of rehearsals. coming into this testimony.
Yeah, and there was he almost had an instinctive reaction whenever there was a protester from Code Pink or any of the other organizations there shouting him down. He would immediately pour some water and have a calm face. They've been preparing for this, staging little mock confirmation hearings at the Trump Transition Office.
We've got an excellent panel here that's going to help us better appreciate what we just heard. Associate Editor of Real Clear Politics, A.B. Stoddard, our Senior Washington Correspondent Jeff Seleny, Justice Correspondent Pamela Brown, April Ryan, White House Correspondent, Washington Bureau Chief for American Urban Radio Network, CNN political commentators Doug Hyde and Simone Sanders. Pamela Brown, you cover the Justice Department for us. Your immediate thoughts?
Well, a couple of things stick out to me. First, when it comes to torture, he was asked about waterboarding, which of course we heard Trump talk about on the trail, saying that he wanted to bring that back. And Sessions did not mince words. He said it's illegal, it is improper, that's the way the Congress has voted. And so that presents an interesting situation there, depending on what Trump wants to do once he takes the White House, that his top law enforcement officer, Attorney General, views it that way. When he talked about the Muslim ban, again, something that Trump talked about on the trail, he says that he opposes that. And it's clear that he is taking a very pro-law enforcement approach, which I think is notable. When you look at the Civil Rights Division under President Obama, it has investigated more than 24 police departments across the country. I wouldn't be surprised if you see a shift with that when Sessions takes over, if he is confirmed.
I want to play this other clip. This is Sessions discussing what derailed his confirmation back in 1986 for a federal judgeship, allegations of racism. Listen to this exchange.
And of course, the ranking Democrat on the committee pointed out that he is the candidate for Attorney General. We're not talking about his Senate record here, but the reality here is that the strong relationships that he has with Republicans and some Democrats is going to play a key role in virtually all of this. They are giving him the benefit of the doubt. You saw Susan Collins introducing him and basically saying what happened 30 years ago isn't as relevant as right now. So yes, he's going to have tough questions, more tomorrow probably than today, when other people